I love trees, and I've become increasingly aware of this in the last week. Leah conducted a wedding at the very beginning of the week in a forest on the edge of Zagreb. And while I was playing Rebbitzin, bringing jewels back and forth, and while Leah prepared for the chuppah and then did her thing, I appreciated the tremendously tall ferns that were all around us. They suggested to me the ancient vibrancy of our Judaism and the enduring commitment that this lovely couple were about to make to each other. I love trees, and over the last week, I've even been thinking about how I could be more like a tree, about how we should all be more like trees. Now, this might seem like an odd thing to say. It's the invitation of the prophet Jeremiah in the Haftarah to be more like a tree. And I do want to think about how we might do that. But I want to address that it could seem that I'm focusing on being like a tree to avoid what this week's Torah portion is most famous for. Bechukotai, and we skip this section, is the passage of blessings and curses. Brachot uklalot. We have 11 verses of blessings, and then I believe 37 verses of curses. 11 verses on what will go well in the world if we act right, and then 37 verses about what will happen if we do not act right. We will fall by the sword. We will consequently, in our fear and panic, stumble over each other, a people divided and risking being submerged by fear, and much, much more. Don't mention the curses is a possible impulse, along with don't mention the war, I guess. You can see why we decided on this volunteer thank you Shabbat to not read the curses. You will fall by the sword and be divided, and even much worse, and mazel tov on all the time and energy you give to our community. Also, there is a tradition, a sense even within our tradition, that we might not dwell on the curses. Traditionally, those 37 lines are all to be read by one person, so there's no interruption, so that there's no dwelling upon them. It might just be too painful and unproductive to dwell on the curses, especially at times when our world is so genuinely afflicted, and when the Torah seems to be calling us to some responsibility for this. So, I want to talk about how to become more like a tree. And there might be a connection. Jeremiah, in the last quarter of the 7th century BCE, while Judah is in existential danger, Jerusalem under siege and soon to fall to the Babylonians, declares, Koch amar Adonai, thus said the Eternal, according to Jeremiah, cursed is the man who trusts alone in mortals, who makes mere flesh his strength and turns his thoughts from the Eternal. He shall be like a bush in the desert, which does not see the coming of good. It is set in the scorched places of the wilderness, in a barren land without inhabitant. Blessed is the one who trusts in the Eternal, whose trust is in the Eternal, Batach B'Hashem. He shall be like a tree planted by waters, sending forth its roots by a stream. It does not fear the coming of heat. Its leaves are ever fresh. It is not worried in a year of drought. It does not cease to yield fruit. So how can we be more like that tree, and how does it differ from the bush? I want to make a few suggestions. We can be more like that tree by tending to our roots. The tree is partly an image of productivity. It will continue to bear fruit. And in Ethics of the Fathers that we study at this time of year, that image is taken to teach us to be plentiful in our good acts, in our actions. And yet, perhaps counterintuitively, in a culture that sometimes has an obsession with productivity, we're being told that the way to persistently be fruitful is to tend to your roots, not just to be well-rooted, but that tree's roots grow. And so, for me, I root myself in a commitment to Torah and people, right? That's what gives me a sense of who I am and how to act in the world. You might find other roots, but you need to return to your roots, identify them, and tend to them. We might be more like that tree by living imaginatively, and especially imagining how we can be better as people, how we can be better each day. To be like a tree might seem like an odd thing to say, and it might have seemed like an odd thing for Jeremiah to say when aware of such real difficulty. Yet there's something beautiful about believing that you can make a simile real. I love those similes of Homer's Iliad, where we realize descriptively that people can be like animals, tearing each other apart. But the distinctness of our similes in this tradition here, that they are aspirational. They tell you you can make the simile real, you can be encouraged to be different. They insist, as fundamentally does all our Torah, that you can be different and better, and that the world can be different and better. And thirdly, to be like a tree, we might root ourselves in community. The distinction between the tree and the bush in that passage is partly that the tree has greater needs of water, and therefore it dwells interdependently rather than emphatically alone. Tim Flannery, in his foreword on the hidden life of trees, explains, the most astonishing thing about trees is how social they are. The trees in a forest care for each other, sometimes going so far as to nourish the stump of a felled tree for centuries after it was cut down, by feeding it sugars and other nutrients, and so keeping it alive. I struggle to think of a more beautiful metaphor for our Judaism, honestly. And the reason, Flannery continues, that trees share food and communicate is that they need each other. It takes a forest to create a microclimate suitable for tree growth and sustenance. Let's each be like that tree and recognize that we need each other. We begin to realize with Flannery that Jeremiah's image of a tree is implicitly an image of a forest, like that forest on the edge of Zagreb, committed to each other, supporting each other. It takes a forest. Let's be that community, rooting ourselves and standing up, and therefore bringing others closer to us. Blessed is he who trusts in the eternal, whose trust is the eternal. He shall be like a tree planted by water, sending forth its roots. It does not fear the coming of heat. Its leaves are ever fresh. It is not worried in a year of drought. It does not cease to yield fruit. Oh. It turns out we are talking about blessings and curses after all. Cursed is the one like a bush. Blessed is the one like that tree. What Jeremiah has done is refocus the blessing or the curse upon how we respond to the world, rather than what's happening in the world itself. Dr. Rabbi Andrea Weiss points out that the blessed tree or person here is still confronting the coming of heat and a year of drought. It's a realistic image. It would have been very easy to have the tree face only goodness, the converse of the bush. The tree just doesn't unproductively wilt. It responds well, tending to its roots and others. Blessed is that one, Asher Batach Badonai, that trusts in the eternal. Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, insisted that this sort of trust or faith, this bitachon, is not living with certainty. It's living with courage in the face of uncertainty. He expressed this a couple months before he passed away. So be like a tree. And this means being aware of difficulty, living courageously, imaginatively, communally, Tend to your roots and those of others. I want to express my appreciation to all of you for volunteering here, because what you're doing is so much more than volunteering. It's being like that tree. It's leading and shaping this community together. It's each of us developing through our involvement. We're thinking of others in the community and developing them too. Your leadership in these months has been beautiful because it has been such a hard time. Your togetherness and desire to bring this community close together has been beautiful because it has been such a potentially divisive time. Our response to the wrenching horror of October the 7th and the extraordinary pain, loss and suffering of this war has been to come closer to each other and our Judaism, to be prouder practitioners of a kind, sustaining Judaism. Yeshua, strength to you. Keep on developing yourself and developing others here. Make sure that you're blessed and that you bring the world blessing in the face of the current painful difficulties of the world, which we have to be aware of. They can be mentioned, they have to be. Be more like a tree. Be part of this forest. Shabbat shalom.